I seen that there was a stick of wood, and I can remember grabbing that and striking him in the head. Really, there was two promises that I made myself that day. One is that I would never let a man put his hands on me again in any way. And two is that I would never trust another woman. And I ended up with some full-blood Native Americans who were sober and living a different way of life. And they began to work with me and help me to recover. And that's how I first got connected to AA. But recovery has given me a relationship with a power greater than myself that is beautiful. I'm no longer afraid. I'm no longer isolate and hide. And I don't see myself as separate from. I see that I am a part of.
Hello and welcome to 12 Steps and 12 Questions. My name is Silvio and I'm an addict. This pod is full of personal and inspirational stories of recovery from addiction. And in every episode, I'll ask each guest the same 12 questions about their life, addiction, and recovery. Quick warning, there will be some graphic descriptions and a healthy amount of swearing. For this episode, please welcome David. Hi, dear listener. Thank you so very much for tuning into this new episode of 12 Steps and 12 Questions. We've got something exciting going on today. We have a guest today who is a dual or even a triple member of Fellowships. I will let him introduce himself now. Welcome, David G.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here, brother. My name is David G. I am an alcoholic and addict of many sorts. I'm from Oklahoma in the USA. My recovery date is August 8th of 1994, and I'm really glad to be here today. Thank you for inviting me to the show.
That's great. Thank you so much, David. Let's just crack on with it and start with our first question. Our first question is, did you have any adverse childhood experiences?
I did. I grew up with an alcoholic stepfather who was very abusive, and it ended up leading to some traumatic events as I got older. But in the very beginning, there was a lot of abuse, physical and even some sexual, not only from him, but from some other brothers, stepbrothers that I had. And this ended up leading me to become very resentful, very fearful, very disconnected from life, it seemed, for a long time. When I discovered alcohol and drugs early on in my life to try to hide some of the shame and some of the pain, then I began to observe a lot of anger and a lot of violence, and this led to me striking him in the head with a stick of wood when I was about 16 years old, and it eventually led to his death. And so that ended up, I had to pay for those consequences of my actions, by going away for a while. But yeah, there was definitely adverse effects, So.
Yeah. You're chuckling there just for a second. I'm just taking in the weight and depth of what it is that you've just said and what you've shared with us, and I'd like to thank you for that. Much has been said about what it's like to grow up with an alcoholic, and you've talked about the really most difficult bits and pieces there. Am I assuming right that you were basically constantly in fear from the age of 6 or 7 years old?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of fear, because you never know how the alcoholic or the addict is going to act once they come in, because, and not only while they drank, but while they're sober as well. If they're untreated, they don't have a program of action, which he did not, then, we're very restless, irritable, discontent. And we tend to take that out on the ones we love, not because we hate them, but because they're easy targets. And that was what happened with me. So.
Yeah, absolutely. What role did your mother play in this? Was she standing by?
Yeah, very untreated Al-Anon, very codependent in relationships, very fearful of losing her man. It, there was a lot of love there for me, as much as any mother could have, but there was also a lot of distance, a lot of disconnect. And, in fact, when I struck him in the head and it ended up taking his life, one of the things that she had said to me is, I'm going to call the police. You need to leave. And my first thought was, this has been going on for years with me. You never called the police one time. So that really, I think that led to other addictions later on, because I was very unsettled when it come to women. There was no trust, and I thought that I had to get them before they got to me. And so that's where some of the other addictions ended up later on.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you manage to, in all this time, get a bit of schooling in? Amongst all the capital T trauma that we're talking about here?
A bit, as you say. I left school in the first part of the 11th grade, and I never returned. I ended up going to jail and spent some time there. And then whenever I got out, I went to work. And, I began to really not get a good work ethic behind me until I had gotten sober in 1994. And at that point, I really began to pursue other areas of employment. But as far as school, no, I never did go back.
Our question 2 is, and obviously with all the things that you've shared, we need to look at this with some sort of caveat, but let's go for it nonetheless. So our question 2 is, what did the moment you first got hooked, or the fun times, what did they look like?
Well, there was a feeling of freedom. There was a sense of, fear, being relieved of fear. When I would take a drink of alcohol, it would settle me some. What I didn't realize is, though, the physical craving within the body, as we learn in Alcoholics Anonymous, is the allergic reaction, the phenomenon of craving. Once we put alcohol in our body, then it demands more of the same. So the good times were coupled with I need more and more and more and my idea was so that I could feel good, that I could live life and function. But what I didn't realize is physically I'd become addicted to alcohol.
Mm. So you'd say that you were drinking alcoholically more or less from the get-go?
Yeah, very young age. So
yeah. How old were you then, do you think?
The first time that I began to drink was, I was pretty young, probably 9 or 10 years old, but I wasn't a daily drinker like I hear a lot of people say, I was drinking daily. Now, I wasn't. Every chance I got, I would definitely drink, but I was definitely not a daily drinker at 9 or 10. I probably could have been if it would have been available for me, but it wasn't. So.
Mm-hmm. And a little later, when you're sort of, hitting puberty, the first times, the times where usually most people start to get involved into some sort of partying and having a good time and so on and so forth. Was that the same for you, or was it entirely different?
It seemed to be that, I would take it a little further than everyone else. They would go out to have a good time. They would want to go home, or they would meet a lady. They would want to, to pursue other things. But for me, it was about continuing to stay and drink and be in the party and do drugs and do the other things. And that was always more important to me than any relationship or anything I had going. So.
Sure. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Were you thinking at the time that your behavior was somewhat weird, or that it looked different from other people's behavior around alcohol?
I think that the thoughts probably crossed my mind some, but my pride, everybody, that I was the life of the party, that I was blinded by self. I didn't know until many years after being in the program that, self manifested in various ways is what has defeated me. It's not lust. It's not booze. It's not drugs. It's not used it as a badge of honor that I could outdrink it. It is self that manifests in various ways. And when I say thought, lust, self, I'm sorry. When I say self, I'm talking about a set of ideas, concepts, beliefs, attitudes, actions, feelings that are false. And my life is driven by those things. And they usually are created out of childhood trauma, things that we have been through. Anything that takes on the persona of me and makes me think that I'm it, then, that's absolutely false. And that's what had happened. So, without me knowing.
Seems to me that with all the things that he had going on, the fun times didn't seem to last as long as maybe they would do with other people, at least not by the sound of it.
No, absolutely not. They seemed to come and go pretty quickly. I was always moving on to the next level of drinking or drugging or whatever it was I was doing at the time. I had to keep finding different heights, elevation to that type of living, and so I become very hooked on drugs at that time, and a lot of methamphetamines and other things. And I'm assuming that we are talking about dual addictions here. That's okay, correct? Or
sure, no, absolutely. Yeah. There's all addictions. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So would you say that drugs played a larger part in your life than alcohol at that time, or does it not really matter in the end?
I think that alcohol probably played the biggest part in my life, but drugs was a very big part of that. For me, the drugs was just a sideshow to the alcohol, because with those I could drink more, drink longer, stay awake, be present, So, but any time that I had to choose between one or the other, which normally I didn't, but if I did, I would always choose the alcohol over the drugs, at that time anyway. It became increasingly more difficult as time went, but.
And no awareness around the fact that this was doing something for you that you couldn't do for yourself.
Yeah, I was absolutely aware of that. Even long before I knew what that statement meant, I was aware of that. So.
Our question 3 is, what were your worst consequences and finally your rock bottom? Here comes another caveat, klaxon, of course. Not everybody has them. Many people have many rock bottoms. Some people don't come in on the back of one, but nonetheless, I think it's a valid concept to discuss. And let me also, while we're here, ask you, and feel free not to answer, but when you got into the physical conflict with your stepfather, were you intoxicated?
There was still alcohol in my system, but I was very aware. It was in the morning. I had awakened, or he had awakened me, wanted me to go to school. School was never important to him for me, but for that morning, somehow, some way, it seemed to be. So he came in to get me up. I was very drunk, very hungover, very sick, and he proceeded to, move forth with violence like he had always done. And so we wrestled out to we had a large wraparound porch on our home, and he cut wood because we burned wood in a wood burning stove. And I, he had slapped me around a few times. And I remember from the peripheral, the corner of my eye, I seen that there was a stick of wood, probably, 2 foot long, probably 1.5 inches in diameter. And I can remember grabbing that and striking him in the head. And, as he went down, it opened him up pretty, he began to bleed a lot. And one of the things he told me is, whenever I get up, I'm going to kill you. And I knew that he meant that. And so I made a decision based on self that later put me in a position to be hurt. But, I snapped that day. And that's when I really, really beat him unconsciously with the stick of wood. And from that day forward, and after my mother came out and all of that had taken place, really there was 2 promises that I made myself that day. One is that I would never let a man put his hands on me again in any way. And 2 is that I would never trust another woman. So it was many years after being in AA and many times through working the steps that I could look back on that day and say, okay, this is where a lot of the things started for me here.
Yeah, it's unsurprising with the amount of trauma and the big events like that, that they would leave so many traces. I'm just trying to get a little bit more of a picture here as well. When you came out of jail, were you still drinking?
I was. In fact, I drank the entire time I was in jail. And there, it's not so hard to come up with as you might think, drugs as well. Here on the streets, I have to go look for the man or meet up with the man or whatever there. He's right next door to me, or either I'm him, one of the 2. And so, yes, I was absolutely still drinking when I came out.
How did it progress? I know from my own story and from the many stories I've heard, of course, so personally, I have to say my story started with some agency, some ability to control things. I didn't drink and use alcoholically immediately. There wasn't much of control going on, but there was some, right? And then it progressed, right? In a sort of S-curve kind of a thing, right? It seemed flatlining for quite some time, and then all of a sudden everything went absolutely haywire. That was my progression. Now, here you are, you are in jail, and maybe we're talking about the time where you came out of jail, and you're hugely traumatized. You've got a massive drug and alcohol problem from what it is that you're saying. How did it progress, David?
Well, I'd met a young lady, and as soon as I got out, and we ended up getting together, and I drank all the way through that, and we ended up having 2 children together. I was nowhere near ready to be a dad, but that was really probably the first time that I began to seek help after the first one was born, I stepped out of the hospital as she was in labor to have a drink. And that was on December 22nd. It was January 4th before I made it home. And so I seen that I'd been in a blackout all that day, all that time. And so what I'd done is I'd taken the drink, and as they say in the program, the drink had taken me. And so then I really began to realize, hey, this thing's a little more serious than I might have thought. And so then I began to experience blackouts quite a bit. I missed a lot of his growing up. And about a year and a half later, we had another son, and I thought, well, this time, I'll make up for this. And it was the same story, blackout drinking. I was getting worse and worse as time went along. And that was the very first time I had checked into a detox center to try to get my life turned around. That didn't last. That didn't last.
Yeah. Did you want to stop the consequences and control your drinking, or did you really want to stop in your heart of hearts at this point?
No, I think that I wanted the consequences to go away, but to continue to drink. In fact, I tried to practice that for a long time to come with no success. So,
well, we've got another question about that coming up. So we'll leave that one there resting just for a time being. But so, just in terms of time frame and things, how old were you then? I mean, by the time that your second child was born.
Let's see. I was early 20s by then. I was probably 24, 25, somewhere in that area. Yeah.
Yeah. So still a really young man.
Yeah, very much.
To all intents and purposes, yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then it progressed. And as I said, let's talk about rock bottoms. You went to some detox facilities that didn't last, as you said. How did it progress, and how did you find the rooms?
I ended up really falling off of the deep end after the second son was born. I checked into a detox center. I ended up deciding to leave. I didn't want to be there anymore. They gave me antabuse in order to come out, and in less than a week, they warned me very strictly what would happen to me if I drank on antabuse. And in less than a week,
which is a medication.
Yes. Less than a week later, the obsession to the mind returned, and I took a drink of alcohol, and I began to drink on antabuse, and I got very sick and very drunk. And I talked to my ex-wife, and by this time, I'd been arrested for possession. I was going to jail. I was being charged for a lot of different things. And so I decided, like most alcoholics, to move to a different part of the country that would make it all better.
Right.
And so we left and we went to Indiana, and while there, the drinking became worse, and she ended up leaving me. She had family there, and we'd been together for some time, had the 2 children, and that was really, I thought that was my rock bottom, because I began to live on the streets, and I was just in a very bad way. I was stealing liquor from the liquor store, doing all the things, couldn't work, couldn't make a living, and it just went from bad to worse. And now I'm 1,000 miles away from home. I don't have any support, any connections. And I meet a guy, in fact, at a plasma center. We were donating plasma there to get money to drink, of course, And, he began to talk to me about the rooms of AA. In fact, he had somebody come down and do a 12-step call on me while we were at a restaurant, although he was drinking as well. I mean, he had been in and out for a long time. But, I would like to say that took, and I stopped drinking and everything worked out, but I drank another 5 years after that. So I ended up coming back to Oklahoma. I brought the 2 sons. That lasted only a short time. She come back and got them. It was a very ugly story in between. My mother had helped set up the event for her to come get the children, take them back to Indiana. I was very angry. I set my mother's house on fire with her in it. And it just went from bad to worse. I began to hide out in the mountains here in Oklahoma. I was very welcomed in the outlaw community. I got drunk one night and started a fire. I was very bad to start fires, and I burned most of the mountain down. At this point, they did not want me there anymore. And so I made it down the backside of the mountain, and I ended up with some full-blood Native Americans who were sober and living a different way of life. And they ended up taking me in, and they began to work with me and help me to recover. And that's how I first got connected to AA. I went with them. They took me in and taught me their ceremonial ways. I started doing ceremonial purification lodges and different things that the Native Americans do. And that was my first taste of spirituality as I'd known it. And it's still a practice that I do even to this day, 30 years later. So
let me, if you don't mind, very quickly go off script for a second here. Let me just try and sum this up. You went back to Oklahoma. You were living on the street. You had no job. You were, well, how can I put this? You were penniless, probably.
Bum.
And you would, yeah, exactly. You were a bum, living hand to mouth.
Yeah.
You set a few things on fire, right? The house of your mother, a mountain, and then you find a Native American tribe.
Yes.
Right? Who took you in and helped you to find AA. Am I summing this up correctly?
You are. In fact, I am a member of the Choctaw Nation here in Oklahoma. I have been all of my life. That's and so the area that I was in whenever I escaped from the mountain, that's where they all were, that they lived in those areas. And so I have a tribal membership card with the Choctaw Nation that allowed me to get into their facility, and they ended up keeping me there for about 12 weeks. Now, it wasn't that I wanted to be there, but I was running from the law. I was running from me. I was running from everybody. I was just trying to find a place to get to be safe, and I ended up with them. And it turned out to be the best thing that really ever happened to me. That was my journey into recovery there.
And a fascinating journey it is, I have to say. Now, stepping back ever so slightly, just before you found this and the entrance to AA, our question 4 is, at your worst, did you ever want to die?
Oh, yeah.
Did you consider suicide?
Yeah, very, very much, and probably, more toward the very end. Prior to that, I thought more of homicide than I did suicide. But there at the very end, it just, life wasn't worth living anymore. I was a young man, but I was getting nowhere, and I just seen that I wasn't going to go anywhere. My children were gone now. I mean, my wife was gone. The places that I would end up, the people I would end up with is just disgusting. I wouldn't go there with a gun today. But it was, life was, it just wasn't worth living anymore. Yeah, or so I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And how dark it is before the dawn, of course.
Before the dawn.
Question 5 is, what other methods did you try to get sober before finding the room? So we've covered a little bit of it, but let's expand just a little bit. I know that you went to the detox places. What else did you try?
Church was a big one. My family is United Pentecostal, and that's something that I've just never really been able to accept. Assembly of God churches. And so I tried that, and I tried different churches as well. I'd been to psychiatry. Our tribe pays for all of that. That's all free. And, I had also tried to learn meditation from a couple of different monks that I'd met through the years. So there were a lot of different things that I had tried. Therapy, like I say, that was a big one. And for me, and I just said this in a book study, I'm doing a big book study in Egypt with an interpreter, and we're in that part of the book, actually. And that was one of the questions. And to answer that question, I think therapy is very good if your problem is therapeutic. But what I come to find out is my problem is spiritual. And so it's going to take a spiritual experience to overcome that. But to answer your question, many churches, therapists, psychiatrists, counselors, one-on-one, even with other alcoholics in AA, I'd been to meetings, and I'd relapsed many times over. So, yeah, there were a lot of different things I'd tried.
Just out of interest, that time span that we're talking about here, from you being in the rooms but being in and out of the rooms, how long was that roughly?
I would say that probably went on a year and a half. Yeah. And, I had been introduced to AA some while I was in jail. they would come in and do an AA meeting, which, I would go to get extra time taken off of my sentence, but I was there, but I wasn't there. I wasn't present. So.
Thank you, David. Thank you for sharing that. Now, question 6 is, when you came into the rooms, did you struggle with the word God?
I did, absolutely. I can remember one of the first meetings that I ever went to. At the end of it, they closed with the Lord's Prayer, and I just thought, "Oh God, yeah." So, what I've come to learn, and this may be a question for later, I'm not sure, but what I come to learn is the word God. It's a term. The word Spirit, it's a term. Source, it's a term. It doesn't matter what you call Creator, whatever, it's a term. And so there's a process in our book, and I will talk about this later if you ask it, but there's a process, an exercise in our book of Alcoholics Anonymous that's called spiritual terms. And we look at the terms and we ask ourselves what they really mean to us. And this is where I really began to get a better idea and experience with God. But at the time that you're talking about, yes, it very much bothered me a lot.
Yeah. Let's talk about question 7 is, how do you experience your higher power today? So let's talk about this process that you're alluding to there. I think it is the right moment.
On page 47 of the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and I've studied that book thoroughly for many years now and had a lot of experiences through it. One of my earliest sponsors was Charlie of Joe and Charlie, so I've had very, very good direct mentors in the book that have been directly tied to AA in a way that a lot of people are not. And I'd been through the steps many times through the years, but I'd also picked up sex addiction along the way, and that came to a crashing halt in 2019. So I'd went back through the process with a man, and this, it was very life-changing every time that I'd done it, especially in the beginning. But in 2019, I went through it in a way that I never had before. And when you get to the chapter to We Agnostics, actually there's 3 exercises laid out in that chapter, and I never knew that. We just always kind of read through those and kept going. But the first one is on page 46, and it talks about a starlit night, that is fleeting and soon lost. And so the exercise for me was that I needed to sit down and reflect on a place that I had been in my life where, and some people call it an aha moment, but where I was just absolutely at peace, and then a thought would come in behind that and steal that experience away from me. And so in 2010, my wife and I were at the Grand Canyon in Arizona, and I can remember looking over that massive hole in the earth, and it was just the most beautiful thing. They refer to it as a starlit night, but for me, and so what happened was there was a thought that came behind it, said that if you get too close to the end of this thing, you're going to fall off and it'll kill you. And it just stole that experience from me. Well, that exercise is set up to show us that to keep an eye on those thoughts so they don't come in and take that away from us in that way. So when we get to page 47 in the big book, there's an exercise laid out there as well. And we call that spiritual terms. And it says, do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. And I have a lot of templates on this. I have a lot of my talks that are on YouTube. I have, Spotify, lots and lots of talks and big book studies that I've given. But this was so important. I can remember taking a sheet of notebook paper, drawing a line through the middle of it, almost as if it were 2 columns. And on the left, I took a look at what spiritual terms really bothered me. On the right-hand side, I needed to ask myself honestly, what do these really mean to me? So one of the things that the terms that had always bothered me a lot through the years was about Christianity, Jesus Christ, Holy Spirit, Son of God, meditation, prayer. All these things are spiritual terms, and they were things that had really rubbed me in some way or another. But the main question becomes, what does this really mean to me? And so as I began to prayerfully consider that, and like I say, I've been sober a lot of years by now and going through this, I started looking at what does this really mean? And what I had been taught as far as in religion is that Jesus was whipped, he was beaten, he was maimed, he was killed. And they always told us it's your fault. It's your fault. It's my fault. It's our fault. And I just could never accept that. I was just like, no, that's not true. I wasn't around. I had nothing to do with that. But they always made that very clear. So here's what happened to me as a result of that exercise. I learned that it was time that I needed to unlearn the things that I was taught by those who were wounded. Those people were still very wounded in their life. They may not have been in Alcoholics Anonymous, but they had had a lot of trauma in their life that they hadn't recovered from yet. And they were trying to teach me a conception of God that was taught to them, although they wasn't able to live up to it. And I never really noticed that at the time. So I really began to, here's what I discovered. It's not so much that I hated Jesus or Christ or holy or any of that like I thought. It wasn't that I couldn't accept it. I just couldn't accept the way they were teaching it to me. So I was able to let their teaching go and adopt one of my own through the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, through the other material that I study. And I really began to study this man and study his ways. And he talked about being loving and being humble, and I'm here for you. I'm here for you to the end, and I'm this and I'm that. That's nothing what I had learned. I'd always learned that you do this, or he's going to get you. And that's nothing what I read. And so I began to prayerfully ask God to reveal those things to me, which had been hidden from me. One of my prayers was, please remove the veil so I may see what's really happening and not be intoxicated by stories and fears. And as I continued these prayers over and over, slowly the veil began to lift and I started to see the truth. And it was like, yeah, there's no way that what they've taught me is true. I can build a relationship here. And so today I can very much tell you that my relationship with God is along those lines, Jesus, Holy Spirit, but it's not the way I was taught. And I don't push that on to other people. But that is my conception, and it's made all the difference in the world in my recovery now. So
yeah. I'm mesmerized. Thank you for the mini book study here. I wasn't really getting much more than I bargained for here, I have to say. That's very generous of you.
Sorry if I've taken up more time than I should here.
Not at all. No, on the contrary, I absolutely. There's a good reason why there's these questions are in there. It's because they reflect the struggles that many of us, me first and foremost, have had with the word God. And it is not dissimilar in some ways, although I've not been anywhere near sober as long as you have, but some of the prejudices and preconceived ideas I have brought with me coming into the program sound very similar. I think they often do. For me, there was always that sense of, Jesus died for you on the cross and all those sort of things that I was sort of, I can't even tell you exactly when it happened. There wasn't one particular person who did that, or I wasn't abused by a church member or anything like that. It was just constantly always there. And it was something, if anything, that gave me fear. It gave me fear rather than comfort. And so obviously when we come into the rooms, that's tough to
process
work through.
Absolutely, it is. Until we realize that it's just a term.
If you're enjoying this podcast and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe.
I can use any term I want to define this source, this spirit, this whatever it is. That's just the term I choose now. So spiritual terms is a very, very, it's an important exercise that I do with everybody I take through the work in the big book, because it really challenges them to hold the beliefs that they've had up to the light to see which ones work for them and which ones does not. And then they can let the ones go that doesn't and hold on to the ones that do. And yeah, it's a beautiful process. So.
And just returning to our question 7, if you wanted to have another word about this, which is, how do you experience your higher power today?
Today, I experience it through intuition. I experience it through other people. Nature is a big one for me. I do a close walk with an old shaman, which is a full-blood Cherokee Indian here in Oklahoma, and he's taught me many things about nature, how to look at the spirit of everything. Everything God created has spirit. Everything man created does not. So when I'm in nature, I really find myself at one with like the earth, the sky, the trees. I know that a lot of people argue that we're not at one with that. And in form, as far as in form, they're absolutely right. But the same spirit that created the tree created me. And so, yes, how can I not be at one with the spirit? And it wasn't until I really started accepting that, recognizing that, and becoming a part of that I really started feeling the connection. I learned a way to go through the fear inventory process that was absolutely beautiful. It showed me how I'd relied upon self in order to try to eliminate fear, which never worked. But it showed me what would this look like if I trusted and relied upon God. And I started listing all the ways that would look like. And then that becomes my prayer. Help me be willing, help me be willing. And as a result, I gain a conscious understanding and an experience with this power. And that's kind of where I'm at with it today. It's something that I'm a part of, not apart from. I always thought this power was another entity somewhere else. And here I am, and that's just not the case. Not for me. Anyway.
Yeah. It's beautifully said, beautifully put there. I'm not going to, I don't want to mislead anyone here. I find it sometimes still difficult to remember this and have this with me at all times. It's a question of connecting and disconnecting, I suppose. Over time that I go through, I find that I can, if I am out in nature, something I don't do enough of, it takes me a while to realize that I am just as much part of it as the tree is, or
absolutely
as everything else is, that I'm not separate from it, that, I might sort of look at it separately, but really I'm just as much part of it, as any other being. So yeah, beautifully put there.
Yeah, you absolutely are, and so am I. And one of the things that I always ask the guys that I work with are the waves separate from the ocean, or are they a part of it? Is water, or is that just different form? Same way with the clouds in the sky. It's all oneness now. And once I was able to connect to that, and a lot of people say, I don't believe that, and that's okay. You don't have to believe as I believe. And the book makes that very clear.
So our question 8 is, which parts of the steps were the most difficult for you? Now, you said, obviously, you came into AA quite a long time ago, but you also then had another surrender, and when it came to sex addiction. So you can, if you want to, you can talk about both parts of the steps there, which I assume were quite different from one another.
Absolutely. Step 1 was very, very hard for me. Basically, because I didn't really understand it. I just thought I had to come and admit that I was an alcoholic or I was an addict of sorts, and then I had really accepted step 1. And we hear it in the rooms often, the step 1 is the only one that I do 100% every day. But as I read and study the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, there's 88 pages that lay out the first 11 steps, the directions to the first 11 steps. 43 of those pages are on step 1. So tell me you do that 100% every day. I have to call BS there, because, just because I don't drink today doesn't mean I've completely accepted step 1 in all of my affairs. I mean, because there's times that I still think I have power in my family life and in my job and different things. But I see that I'm powerless for 2 reasons, not one. Once I put it in my body, I can't stop. And once I take it out of my body, I have a mind that always leads me back. So I'm powerless for 2 reasons. Now, my life is unmanageable, not because I've lost family, home, and everything, but because there's a hole within that nothing can fill. Toys, sex, drugs, alcohol, any of that stuff. I've tried all that. There's only power. There's only a power that can fill that. So if I'm powerless in step 1, obviously the answer is power in step 2. If insanity's ruling my life, then obviously sanity's the answer to that in step. So really what I'm trying to say, I guess, is step 2 becomes the answer to all of the program. But if I don't work the other 10 steps as outlined in the book, I fall away from that power back into my powerlessness. So in 2019, I ended up hitting an emotional bottom with sex addiction. And I had been living with that secret many years and trying to get away from it, trying to get over it. And nobody was really talking about that in AA. And I was having a tough time, and I would change sponsors. I'd go through the steps, and I just could not get free of this. So in 2019, whenever I came back, and I was very much at an emotional bottom, step one, again, I had to look at why I was powerless over lust and how that manifested with me. So I would say the hardest step for me to get to would be step one. And then step three, it asks us, you hear a lot of things in the room. That's that's just I mean, you're agreeing here to work steps 4 through 9, or you'll hear about 3 frogs on a log. One decided to jump. How many's left? No, you still got 3. You didn't, I don't believe any of that crap. What I do is I look at what the book says, and it says that we could at last abandon self utterly to him. And that's where I found myself. It wasn't until I could at last totally abandon self to him that I really began to recover from self, because lust, alcohol, drugs, food, whatever the addiction may be, that's not the cause. That's just the effect. The cause is self, and the book makes that very clear. But to answer your question specifically, I think step one would probably be the hardest that I've experienced each time.
It's an incredibly tough place to be before you come into the rooms and you have an awful problem, and you carry a secret, and maybe you're leading a double life even, and all of those sort of things. It's a very, very difficult place to be in. And that surrender, the first surrender, is the most difficult one. No two ways about it.
Yeah. And even after being in the room for a long period of time and resting on my laurels and falling back in the steps, I'm still going through the motions. I'm still speaking at a lot of events. I'm still doing weekend book studies everywhere, but I'm living a double life, and I can't get away from that. And that's where I found myself. So,
Question 9 is, which character defects give you most trouble today?
I would have to say fear would be the biggest one. It doesn't really give me a lot of trouble today, but it has. And but when I look at the defects of character, I have to look at their source. I don't see them as each one being something different. I see them as being a manifestation of self. Because page 62 of our book says self and self-centeredness, that's the root of our trouble. We're driven, and you know the lingo, by 100 forms of fear and whatever. But when I look at the word driven, and if I'm being driven by these things, then obviously I'm not the one behind the wheel. Now, I'm along for the ride, but I'm being driven by these things. And what I began to notice as I read and went through that part of the book again after many years of being in recovery and being sober, is fear is really what drives all these other emotions to the surface. Now, as long as I'm aware of those in step 10 and I turn from those the way it asked me to, then there's not a lot of consequence there. But the problem is I'm asleep to that. I don't really know that's what's happening to me. And I'll take action based on that thought or emotion, and that creates a reality of destruction. Even while I'm sober, I hurt people by saying things I shouldn't, stuff like this. And I'll think, man, why did I do that? And I recognize it's probably fear of this, but as I start to practice step 10 on a daily basis, and when I work with a man, and no matter whether he's got 1 day or 1 year or how many ever years, we always start at 10 and 11, and then I go back through the process of the book reading while he's doing that the entire time. And that gives him something to hold on to and to be aware of, and it makes him accountable every single day. And so, yeah, it's a in the beginning, in the early days of AA, they always started with self-examination, prayer, and meditation. That's steps 10 and 11. Then they would take them through the process of the steps, but you never left those out. And so that's what I've adopted, and I've seen it work very well. I've seen over 30 men recover from sex addiction in the last 5 years, and countless in AA now, from alcohol and drugs. So
starting with step 10 and then going to step 1 later in your line of sponsorship.
Okay, yeah. We do, we start on page 84. We read through the directions. Okay, this is what I expect from you on a daily basis. No days off here. I take them to the nightly review on page 86. Okay, I expect this by email every evening. On awakening, this is what it says for us to do. And I give them a day or two to get in sync with that, sending those to me regularly. And then we meet, we start at the front of the book and we begin to read through the book. When it says pray, we pray. When it says write, we write. It's just, we don't get away from the book.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And really inspiring. Really inspiring. Thank you so much, David. Question 10. What is the best thing recovery has given you?
I would have to say my relationship with God, number one, today. Now, before I would have come up with all this other stuff first. But recovery has given me a relationship with a power greater than myself that is beautiful. I'm no longer afraid. I'm no longer isolate and hide. I don't see myself as separate from. I see that I am a part of. The second thing would have to be my wife. There's been a lot of hurt. There's been a lot of forgiveness there. But through it all, our relationship has molded into a place today that's just absolutely beautiful. I'm a semi-driver. I drive for one of the largest fleets in the U.S., and I'm in a different state every week. So I'm always picking her up a little something here, a little something there. It's just I'm consciously aware of my relationship with her now, and I work at that very hard. I let her know on a daily basis how important she is to me. And I don't know, in the last year or so especially, it has really went to a new level. So, yeah.
How wonderful.
I would have to say. Yeah, we just celebrated 23 years of being together. In January will be 20 years of marriage. So
congratulations.
A lot of hurt, but a lot of healing as well. So
yeah, absolutely wonderful. Just probably also just off the cuff, the best moment for me to give a shout out to my wonderful wife, Anna, who has been so incredibly supportive, and wouldn't know where I'd be without her.
It's a requirement when a guy works with me. I mean, that's the first thing I ask him: where you at with your relationship with your wife? And, what are the things you're doing on a daily basis to show her, not just tell her in passing, we really look at ways of in the family afterwards and working with others and the different things that we can do to make our family life better with our wife. That's a must now.
Mm-hmm. Brilliant. Thank you. Question 11 is, what would you say to a newcomer or someone wondering if they're an addict?
I would say that, if you're wondering that, if you're contemplating that in any way, then there's probably a pretty good idea that you already are. But to be sure, there's a couple of questions. There's not 44 or 66 like you might read in a pamphlet. It's 2 questions here, and this is what I've asked of each newcomer to take a look at. It says, in the preceding chapters, you've learned something of alcoholism. We hope we've made clear the distinction between the alcoholic and the non, and in those first 3 chapters, it absolutely does that. So when a man comes in, I don't ask him to go read the book and come back and see me. I read the book with them. Not because I don't think they know how to read or any of this, but we come in with a mind that is asleep. And so if I ask you to go read the book and you come back, then you're going to have a sleepy outlook on what the book had to say. But there's 2 questions here. And one is, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. That's a question. Ask yourself, can I quit entirely once I start? That's because of the mental obsession. If you answer no, then that is a pretty good idea. It says, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, that's because of the physical allergy. You learn as you get into the book. But I ask myself this question: anything that I take physically, do I have little control over it once I start taking it? And if that answer is yes, our book says right here, you're probably alcoholic. And if that's the case, you may be suffering from an illness that only a spiritual experience will conquer. So I would tell the newcomer, go to that page, look at those 2 questions, and ask yourself that honestly. I mean, relate that to somebody else if you want to, but in the beginning, if you're struggling with being honest with someone else, take a good look at that yourself, and then just ask for willingness to share that with someone. But those 2 questions will answer that question you just asked.
Indeed so. Indeed so. And our last question, which is our question 12. What do you want your higher power to say to you, quote unquote, at the pearly gates?
Welcome. job well done. That would be probably absolutely what I would have him say. And I don't want to go too deep with this. I don't think any of those are places that we go. I think those are places that we're at. If you look up the word eternity and its root of that word, it means now. And so I don't think it's a place I go. I think it's a place I'm at. And same way with the other word, hell. So I don't want to get too deep into any of that. But if that were to happen, that's what I would want him to say. Welcome, job well done.
Yeah, fantastic.
Job well done.
David, job well done indeed. Thank you so much. You've been so courageous and so full of insight and really inspirational as well. And I can't thank you enough for being my guest on 12 Steps and 12 Questions today.
Thank you. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you so much.
We've come to the end of this episode. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it and would like other addicts and alcoholics to hear it, then please make the pesky AIs and algorithms work their 12th step. Hit like and subscribe. While this pod is based on the 12-Step Recovery Program, it's not officially affiliated with any 12-Step Fellowship. 12 Steps and 12 Questions is not substance or behavior specific, it's fully self-supporting and not-for-profit. And you know this next bit. It's not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization or institution. It does not wish to engage in any controversy, and it neither endorses nor opposes any causes.